Hello, welcome to another episode of Arthritis and You, A Joint Journey. Today, we've got something special lined up, so buckle up because it's time for the deep dive. Let's give a warm welcome to our hosts, Arthur and Sarah.
So if you or someone you love depends on biologics, to manage some kind of chronic illness, you've probably heard about biosimilars. And maybe you're thinking, bio what? Well, today we're doing a deep dive on biosimilars, figuring out what they are, how they're different, and what switching to one might mean for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a confusing topic. It's understandable.
Yeah.
We're talking about some pretty powerful medications for some pretty serious conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis. I mean, these are all situations where basically your immune system is attacking your own body.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a little.
Yeah.
So we know biologics are a big deal for these conditions. But just as a reminder, what makes them so special?
Well, I think of biologics kind of like finely tuned weapons in our arsenal, right? So unlike those small molecule drugs, like something like aspirin, biologics, they're large, complex proteins. They're often antibodies that are designed to target very specific parts of the immune system. And what this does is it helps to dial down that overactive immune response we were just talking about.
So it's not just like a general calm down signal to the immune system. It's like a targeted strike at the root of the problem.
Exactly. And because these are derived from living organisms, the manufacturing process is incredibly complicated, which is important to keep in mind when we start talking about biosimilars in a bit.
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting, right? Because if biologics are so complex, how can you even have similar versions?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. Is imagine trying to recreate a gourmet chef's signature dish. You can follow that recipe really closely. You can use, top-notch ingredients, but it's not going to be an exact replica, not at the molecular level.
Yeah.
And that's actually a key difference between biosimilars and, say, generic drugs.
Okay, so biosimilars, they aren't held to that same, identical twin standard as generics.
Nope, you got it. And that's because, again, they're just so complex, these biologics. But, and this is important, this does not mean that biosimilars are any less safe or effective.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah, they still go through very rigorous testing. They have to meet really strict standards that are set by, organizations like Health Canada. They have to prove that they work just as well as those original biologics, but they just might have very, very slight variations in their, makeup.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not like any company can just kind of come along and whip up a biosimilar, right?
No, not at all. The regulations, the oversight, it's incredibly strict. And that's to make sure that these medications are both safe and effective for patients.
That makes sense. Now, those first big biologics, the, I don't know what you'd call them, the originals, those came out over 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Which is incredible to think about. But does that kind of age of these drugs, does that have anything to do with the rise of biosimilars?
Oh, absolutely. As those patents expire, it opens the door for biosimilars to enter the market, often at a lower cost. So imagine a drug, like a blockbuster drug, like Enbrel. Enbrel is a TNF blocker that's used to treat inflammatory diseases.
TNF blocker, just, for those of us who don't speak doctor, can you just break that down for us a little bit?
Of course. So TNF, or tumor necrosis factor, it's this protein in our bodies that promotes inflammation. And in conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, TNF, it goes a little haywire, and it causes the immune system to basically attack the joints. So TNF blockers, like this drug, Enbrel, they essentially block that protein. And by blocking that protein, you reduce inflammation and you ease the symptoms.
So it's like Enbrel is like the bouncers at the inflammation party to shut things down.
You got it. And now Enbrel, it has these biosimilar counterparts like Erelzi and Brenzies. And these biosimilars, again, rigorously tested, they've been proven to be just as effective, and they can potentially offer patients more affordable treatment options.
That's amazing. So it's like choosing between the name brand cereal and then that generic store brand version. They might look a little different on the shelf, but you're still getting all those essential nutrients.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just Enbrel either. Remember those other big names in the TNF blocker world, like Remicade, Humira?
Oh, right. They're like the heavy hitters when it comes to managing those really tough inflammatory conditions.
Exactly. And guess what? They've got a whole lineup of biosimilars available now, too. So this means more choices for patients and, again, potentially more affordable options, which I'm always happy about that.
Okay, so we've got all these biosimilars, which is pretty promising.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about switching medications. If you've been on a biologic for years and things are going well, I mean, would you want to change things up?
Yeah, it makes sense to be a little hesitant. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Especially when it comes to managing something as important as, a chronic illness.
Exactly. So how do we balance those potential cost savings, which we talked about, with making sure people still get, that care they need?
That's the big question, right? It's definitely a balancing act, but the most important thing, I think, is to just remember that you have to talk to your doctor. That communication is so important. If you're told you might have to switch, don't be afraid to ask questions or to say if you're worried about it. Your rheumatologist is on your team.
Yeah, it shouldn't feel like you're being told what to do. It should feel like a decision you make together.
Absolutely. Your rheumatologist knows your history. They know how you've responded to treatment in the past, and they can really help you look at the situation and figure out the best path forward. And I will say most people do transition to biosimilars without a problem, but it's okay to be a little nervous or to have some questions.
And what happens if someone does have problems once they switch? Like their condition flares up or they have, I don't know, side effects that they didn't have before.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so important to be followed closely by your doctor. They're going to want to track your progress, especially at the beginning, right? During those first few weeks or months. Think of it like, switching from one car to a different car. Same brand, right? It might handle a little differently, but it's still going to get you where you need to go. And if for any reason the biosimilar isn't a good fit, there are things we can do. There are exception processes in place.
So there's a safety net, so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah. You have the right to say something, to advocate for what's best for your health. Now, I know this can feel overwhelming. It's complicated, this kind of medical stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So if you're thinking, where can I even start to learn more about this? I always say knowledge is power, right? And the Alberta Rheumatology website is really a fantastic place to start. They have a one-pager on biosimilars, and it's fantastic. It explains everything in plain English, like what biosimilars are, all the different options. They even have pictures of what the injection devices look like.
Oh, wow. So they show you the actual devices.
Exactly.
That's really helpful. I'm a visual learner myself.
A lot of people are, and you're not going to see any of that confusing jargon on their site either. They do a really good job of making the information easy to understand for everyone.
That's fantastic. Okay, before we finish up today, I wanted to go back to something you said at the beginning about how those first biologics, those have been around for over 20 years.
I know, it's pretty amazing.
It's incredible. I mean, can you imagine where we'd be without them?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
They really changed the way we approach treatment. And so while, their patents expiring, that's what's allowed for all these biosimilars to become available, which is great. It's important to remember how much those original biologics did for people. I mean, they really were a game changer, giving people hope and just a better quality of life.
Absolutely. And, in a way, these biosimilars, they have the potential to do the same thing, but for even more people, right?
Yeah.
Because now even more people will be able to get these life-changing treatments. So for our listeners out there, if you're thinking about switching to a biosimilar, maybe you're just curious, what's the one thing you want them to remember? What's the takeaway?
I would say don't be afraid to speak up. You are your own best advocate. Don't be afraid to talk to your healthcare team. Ask questions, and remember that you're a part of this. This is your treatment plan.
That's so important. You're right. Just that feeling, knowing that you have the information and you can ask for what you need, that makes all the difference.
It really does. It's a partnership, like we keep saying. You and your doctor working together to figure out what's best for you. No one-size-fits-all approach with this, right?
Exactly. Well, this has been so interesting. I feel like we've learned so much even just in this short time. So thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about all of this today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff and hopefully, to help make it a little less mysterious for everybody listening.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, we hope you learned a lot too. We'll be sure to link that Alberta Rheumatology website we talked about so you can find it easily in the show notes. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
This has been another episode of Arthritis and You, A Joint Journey, brought to you by the Rheum team from albertarheumatology.com, your trusted evidence-based suite of resources available 24/7. Straight from Alberta, but for folks around the world. Our hosts today, Arthritis and Sarah Upis. Technical producer, John Ifund. and our executive producer, Stephen Cates. While we work hard to maintain the accuracy of our information, we accept no legal responsibility for any errors or omissions. Remember, always check with your own physician first. Join us next time for another Deep Dive.